SCBA training, like many firefighting skills, is a perishable skill. The old adage is, practice makes perfect. What I'm going to tell you is, perfect practice makes perfect. I'm Chief Rob Wiley, and on today's Fireground Flash Tip, we're going to talk about muscle memory and the need for perfect practice. Muscle memory is an important consideration when you're talking about your training and your proficiency with basic skills. Muscle memory in general is when you do a task so many times that it becomes automatic. When you're called upon to perform that skill, it's already built in. You don't even have to think about it. If your department's like our department, structure fires are on the decline, so we don't get to practice the skills like SCBA as often as we would have maybe in years past. That makes it even more important that we identify that skill and develop a training scenario to practice that skill. Practicing it by itself is not enough though. I've told you that perfect practice makes perfect. So that means it's incumbent on the instructor and on everybody watching to make sure that the skills are being performed to standard, to your SOG. If you do it sloppily, if you do it half-assed, that's the way you're going to do it on a call. I hear people say all the time, well, if this was a real fire, I'd do it differently. That's a load of crap. The way you practice is the way you're going to play. If you half-ass it in a practice session, you're going to half-ass it at a fire and you're going to get hurt or get somebody else hurt. You've got to practice the way you play and play the way you practice. That's why it's important to follow the SOG, make sure people are watching and monitoring to make sure that your practice is going exactly the way it needs to go. There's no excuse for having less than perfect practice because you're going to perform in the field exactly the way you practice in the training room. The most important thing you can do as a company officer, as a training officer, as the chief of your department, is to identify those skills that are critical on the fireground, but you don't get to practice all that often. I'm talking about cutting on roofs with a saw or with an axe, ladder training, hook and ceiling training, all the things that you have to do very well to avoid injury and to be proficient, but you don't get to do on a regular basis. You have to identify those skills and then develop a training scenario that will exercise those skills and build that muscle memory. Experts tell us that it can take up to 1,000 repetitions or more to develop muscle memory. Experts tell us that muscle memory is gained after as little as 1,000 repetitions up to 3,000 repetitions. So you can see you're not getting enough calls in a year that have that skill hit on every time. So training becomes critical. And not only critical training, but correct critical training. So you're doing it the right way every single time. So remember, the first thing you need to do is identify those critical skills that you don't get to practice very often, but they're important on the fireground that you do them right every time. The next thing you need to do is identify a training scenario that will help you develop and hone those skills, like this SCBA training maze that our county association put together. After you've identified those critical skills, you've developed a training scenario to hone those skills, now it's time to practice. Practice, practice, practice. But that in itself is not enough. You've got to have perfect practice. You remember, you play the way you practice, and if you slack off in your practice, you're going to slack off in the game. I'm Chief Rob Wiley, and this has been another Fireground Flash Tip.